Another fabulous guest today as I'm speaking with Carina Bauer. Carina is the CEO of IMEX. She obviously works in Europe with IMEX Frankfurt and in the States with IMEX America in Vegas. And we will be speaking about the role of women in leadership, especially in our industry, and how to have more women in leadership. We'll be speaking about the future of our industry, and we'll be speaking about how business owners can prepare themselves for the future. Hello and welcome back on the Business of Meetings podcast. I'm Eric Rosenberg, and today I am extremely honored to speak with yet another icon in our industry. I think there's really two types of people in this industry: the one that Carina knows and those that knows Carina. So, Carina Bauer from IMEX, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Eric?
I'm good. As you can see in the background, I'm trying to pretend that I'm not recording from home. And thank you so much for taking the time, Carina. Yeah, you're a role model for all of us in this industry. You're a role model for women in this industry. So I'm delighted to speak with you today. And maybe we can start, if you can tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you came to the industry and how you joined the IMEX team.
Yes, so I graduated from college back in 1998, and initially I joined my father in a business that he had set up after selling his show EIBTM, as it was at the time, and he set up a small chain of coffee shops, which I joined right at the beginning. And we grew that into a chain throughout the southeast of the UK over 3 years. And then in 2001, sold that to a publicly listed company. And I then went for a bit of a career break, trying to decide what I wanted to do. And in that time, he had launched IMEX in Frankfurt. He launched that in September 2001, so just after 9/11 actually, with the first show due in Frankfurt in April 2003. And in the middle of 2002, I came back from my break and was trying to decide what to do. And obviously, as everybody in the industry knows, you know, when you're running up to the launch of a big event like IMEX in Frankfurt, and a new trade show, there's so much to do. But actually one of the team fell ill. And so I was asked if I'd come in and help for a few months, which I did. And then that turned into helping through to the launch of IMEX in Frankfurt. And I thought that I'd leave after that and go and do an MBA. But I never left. So I decided that I enjoyed the world of trade shows, and I enjoyed the world of business events, and that would give me a much better learning opportunity than an MBA. And of course, it was familiar to me as well because I'd grown up in this world. You know, my father had launched EIBTM back in the mid 80s. So I'd gone to EIBTM in Geneva every year as a child. And our summer holidays were spent in the States, usually going to the different conferences. You know, it was IACVB, you know, the precursor to Boston International. They used to have their conferences, and then we'd go to MPI's WEC, or I can't remember what it was called back then. So I was quite used to the business events industry. So I didn't really realize at the time as a child, I was kind of learning, but it was very familiar to me clearly. And I enjoyed it. And so I stayed, and I first entered the business looking after all our special projects, our Future Leaders Forum. We had a wildcard initiative, programs like the Association Day, education, and all the marketing, because that was kind of my background from the coffee shop days. But then soon I sort of learned the other elements of the business over the next few years. And so by the time we launched IMEX America in 2009, with the first show in 2011, I transitioned to being a CEO at that point.
Wonderful.
So that was a brief potted history.
Yeah. So I didn't know. So you were a barista at some point in your life?
Absolutely. I was a barista, and I was a very good barista. And we still have a proper plumbed in coffee machine in the IMEX offices when we can get back there. We bring in beans and fresh roasted beans, and everybody that comes and works for IMEX on their first induction day, they get shown how to use the coffee machine and trained how to be a barista. So it's ingrained in us.
That's fabulous. Yeah, right. One question, listening to you, I was thinking of, I loved my father, and I would have never loved to work with him. And so as business owners, excuse me, there's so many of us that actually working with or a parent or a spouse. How is it, and what would be your advice in terms of not only living with each other, but working with each other?
Yeah, I've always worked fairly easily, I suppose, with my father. I think what you have to be able to compartmentalize a little bit. You have to be able to separate and leave some things at the door if you're in a personal circumstance or in a work circumstance. So that would be a piece of advice. But what I think is very good is, if you're working with a family member, there aren't really the same kind of politics involved. You can be very open, very honest, very transparent. You can get things done very quickly because they're kind of no holds barred in terms of your communication. And I think, right, of course, that's not the case in every family, but I think if that is the case in your family, then you can have a successful working relationship, a more successful working relationship. You never have those question marks, what's that person thinking? What is their intention? That never comes up really. So I think you can be very direct, and as a result, I think that can be quite refreshing. But I do remember when I first started working in the coffee shop business, and my sister was working in that business as well, and she had worked previously with EIBTM and his show in the UK Incentive World. And the thing that I struggled with initially was, what do I call him in the office? So that was, or, if you're writing an email or at the time, a letter, a memo, what do you write? Because that was the difficult thing. Right. So, there are little funny things that you kind of have to get over, but once you do, it's fine. So we've always had a pretty easy working relationship.
And I think you made a very good point about no politics and telling it the way it is. That saves a lot of time and energy for sure. Now, Carina, we, as I was saying at the beginning, you're really a role model for all of us in this industry. And specifically, you're a role model for women. This industry is about 80% of women, but when you look into the boards, it's far from being the case. And I know this is a topic which you're totally aware of. What would be your advice for people in the industry, and not only specifically to women, but to everybody? Because I believe that's also something that men should be aware of. What could we do so that we have more equality between the genders in the responsibilities in everything we do?
Yeah, it's a really good point. As you say, we've got a very high proportion of women working in the industry, but a very small proportion comparatively of women in leadership positions. And it's, in a way, we follow a lot of other industries in that regard, and we're not that unusual. I do think we have a very open, welcoming industry, which I think is very positive for women and everybody working in the industry. Compared to other industries, I think we are pretty inclusive and welcoming. But I think that we do need to address this and be honest about it. Certainly, when we launched She Means Business, I know that there were a number of men in the industry who just didn't see it as an issue or a problem. And I think, as you say, women can't do this on their own. They have to take the men who are in leadership positions along the journey with them, and to say, what is it that women need that maybe is different to what men need, in order to promote them and help them develop their confidence as well. And I think it's, that there is a lot of unconscious biases, a lot of subliminal behavior, I think, that can counter those ambitions. And then it is a question of time as well around role modeling, because I think if you role modeling, so if you do see people, whether it like you, in positions of leadership, I think that's a very powerful message. So I think it's important that women who are in positions of leadership do step up to be those role models, or help to mentor people that are coming through, because it will take time. I don't think our industry is inherently biased. I don't think there are, I've never met any men in the industry who don't want women to succeed, you know, that it's not so deliberate. But it is going to take time, I think, to develop that. And I think women, you know, do have a lot of emotional intelligence and skills to bring to leadership positions. And I think the respect for those kinds of qualities, and making sure women understand that those qualities are just as valuable as qualities that maybe are more traditionally male. I think all of those things will help. And there's some great initiatives. I mean, one of the first things that I went to was the IAEE Women in Leadership Conference. It was a full day conference many years ago, maybe 6 years ago. That was the first one I went to, and it was an amazing atmosphere to be in a room just with other women. It was much more open than usual, so you could see that, you know, women were behaving differently because they were in that room, majority women, and it does make a very big difference. So all of those types of initiatives make a very big difference in helping to elevate women.
Right. So you mentioned emotional intelligence, obviously, and I'd like to add two elements to it that are maybe under the umbrella of emotional intelligence. But the first one is authenticity. And I always smile when I mention it, because as you know, what you see is what you get. But people want you to be authentic until the moment you start being authentic. Then they don't like it anymore. And the second thing, as Brené Brown has developed it, is more about the vulnerability and not being afraid to show your vulnerability. Is it also something that you see more into women in leadership than men?
I mean, I think both of those things are difficult for anybody in a leadership position, but I do think that it's maybe more socially acceptable still for women to show those vulnerabilities. And so maybe from that perspective, since that is a quality that is more understood nowadays as being very valuable in leadership alongside other qualities, that maybe that is, you know, to the benefit of women. You know, it's always, if you look back 20, 30 years as a leader, you weren't supposed to show that vulnerability. You know, there were a lot of stereotypes, I suppose, and those stereotypes are being broken down in a way that probably is quite beneficial to women in this day and age. But I think a lot of women still feel that they need to play to the old stereotypes, and that really can hold you back, because unless you can be authentically yourself, whatever that means, then it's hard to be a good leader, I think. So I do think authenticity matters, but I think it's about authenticity, truly showing who you are, rather than authentically being your stereotype that you think you should be. And that's the difficulty, I think.
Oh, well, that's an excellent point. Now you have IMEX in Frankfurt, IMEX in Vegas. So you work on both sides of the pound. And as many business owners who are listening, they're operating international. So I always heard the sentence that says Britain or the UK and the US are two countries separated by the same language.
Very true.
They're very true. Okay. Can you speak about that? Can you maybe give us some more hints about what you experience and what people should be aware when they're working with one side or the other side of the pound?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And certainly when we launched IMEX America, we said, well, we work with Americans all the time, or the trade associations that we're partners with are based there. So many of our exhibitors and buyers come from there. We thought we knew the marketplace, and still we had a cultural shock to a degree. And there were, I mean, just at a basic level, there are a lot of words that are, used in totally different ways. Even basic things. When we were setting up the first show, we were talking about cloakroom, and the venue didn't know what we meant. They thought we meant the toilets, and we meant the coat and bag check. And when we first launched the show, we had our our appointment diaries. And they were like, a diary? A diary is something you write in every night. So, we realized that changed the schedule. So even at a really basic level, the words can be quite different. But I think there is a really big cultural difference as well. There's a big difference in the way humor is used. So from those perspectives, I think it's important not to think that because the language is the same, the meaning or sentiment is always the same. So that's what we've learned over time. I mean, certainly in the US, what we find is, people are so proactive and optimistic and wanting to get things done, and that was fantastic. It was also hard as well because they give you a lot of feedback. So in the run up to the first IMEX America, we were using the systems that we used for years in Frankfurt, and we'd got a bit of feedback and we thought they were pretty good. And suddenly we had these volumes of questions, and we don't understand this, and what is it? And we realized, the feedback was amazing because it allowed us to improve so fast. And we thought, wow, the Europeans must have been having these frustrations for so long, and they never told us, So it was hard at first to deal with that influx, but then it was so great because we were able to utilize it. It was really constructive. So loads of differences, certainly, that we've seen, but we've definitely got used to navigating that really naturally, I think.
And so for anybody who's listening that's working on one side or the other, what would be your advice to prepare yourself for having a meeting and doing business with the other part?
Yeah, I mean, well, at IMEX, we've used training, actually, some formal training using culture active resources.
Oh, yeah.
So if you really want to develop properly, I would really recommend going on to Culture Active, because then you can do your cultural profile, and you can then compare yourself with any nationality or the stereotype of that nationality. And it's really in depth, depending on whether you're doing a negotiation or a business meeting. So from a very structured perspective, that's what I would recommend. But otherwise, I think it's just about asking a lot of questions and not becoming defensive and not making assumptions, which I think is the same with whenever you're working with different cultures, because it's very easy to project what you think you've heard onto somebody else, or the way that you would deal with things onto somebody else. And usually, often that can lead to frustrations which are not intentioned at all. So that's what I would always recommend.
Brilliant. So Culture Active's from Richard Lewis, right?
That's right, Richard Lewis Communications, and there's a website called cultureactive.com, I believe.
Wonderful. Now, going back to you and your leadership, I read what you wrote in, I think it was for Even MB, Julius Solaris, an amazing letter for what you had to face with, obviously, IMEX in Frankfurt, the decision to not having it in May, and how you pivoted in that. But the deepness and the content of what you wrote, really, congratulations. I was very touched with that. As a leader, when you are to face a situation like it is today, can you speak a little bit about the thought process, how you came there? Because I've been telling people what is going on now with COVID-19, that doesn't speak at all to your leadership skills and to your managerial capabilities. But the way you react to it, just the way you did, it was absolutely brilliant. The way you react to it and the attitude and the mindset that you choose to have, that's where you can have an impact on people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think now is the time that will be remembered, both internally in your organization and externally, because now is the time of maximum impact, isn't it, on our industry? So are you going to act with integrity? Are you going to try to help your staff, your employees, your suppliers, your partners to the best of your ability? Or are you going to retrench internally and just look after your own? So I suppose that's really fundamental and shows a lot about who you are and how you lead. I think for us, it was always about looking at our responsibility as a show like IMEX. So we have, so many stakeholders, so many exhibitors from all around the world. We have always felt very keenly our responsibility to make sure that the exhibitors who at the end of the day are funding what we do have a return on that investment. And we were very, very conscious of the money that they would be spending on trust with us, because they'd always had a good experience. And we felt that responsibility very keenly. And we really had to look at it and say, can we guarantee that value for them? And not only that we always want to do that, but my goodness, today, if people are spending money, they better get a value back for it, because resources are tighter and tighter. And even back in early March, when other shows had started to cancel, a lot of our exhibitors were impacted by that. Even Mobile World Congress, the exhibitors in Spain were impacted immediately by that, the DMC groups, the hotels. So we were seeing all of that happen. So first of all, we had to look and say, can we guarantee the hosted buyers are coming? In today's world, it's obvious that the show couldn't take place, but it wasn't so obvious at the beginning of March when we were having to make those decisions. And we were looking at it and saying, how long do we have to make those decisions before our exhibitors go past the point of no return, really, before they're expending money that they can't get back. And that was really important to us, to try to limit the damage for them and also limit the damage for all the supplier ecosystems. So we had a lot of discussions with different suppliers along the chain to try to work out what their point of no return was as well. So I guess it was just really about taking that responsibility very seriously and doing what we thought was the best thing for the industry at that time, even if that felt very difficult for us personally. And for us personally, we would have liked to make that decision later when it was absolutely obvious whether the show could take place or not. But that wasn't a luxury we had. We didn't have that luxury of time if we were going to protect that sort of the industry ecosystem, really. And that's what we felt was the biggest priority.
Wonderful. And the way you communicated was absolutely brilliant, even if it was heartbreaking, but well done, really.
Thank you.
Now, how do you see the future? How do you see the future of the industry? Obviously, there's IMEX America coming after the summer, but the industry at large, what do you think is going to happen in terms of meetings and the impact on our industry?
I guess, if we look at our industry in the long term, if we start there, I think I'm optimistic, because I do believe that the fundamental underlying value of our industry hasn't gone away. The reasons that people want to come together face to face or want to put on business events or live events hasn't gone away. We know that face to face is still the most productive way of communicating brand values, of sharing research, of knowledge transfer, of motivating staff and clients. So I believe strongly that those things haven't gone away, and also that people will want to meet again. They do want to shake each other's hand. They see each other in the eye, look each other in the eye and give each other a hug. So I think the long-term prospects of our industry are still very solid and very sound. I suppose the difficulty is not knowing when that long term will come, because those fundamental reasons are there, but they can only be realized once people are comfortable and once this health situation has been brought under control. And so in the short term, it's obviously very difficult. for the industry. I think in the very short term, hopefully in coming out of lockdown, we'll be able to separate in the minds of governments what they are categorizing as mass events from business events. I think that's really important. There's a campaign in the UK to help the government separate those categories so that they can understand that business events is a very curated group of people who are invited. We can limit the numbers. It's very different to a mass sporting event, and that we don't want to be put in the same bucket as that, which is what has happened up to now. So I think that's really important. Of course, international travel, we don't know when that's going to come back, and that's going to impact the international industry. But I see no reason that slowly, as we get used to a different way of working, that some events can come back in the shorter term, and hopefully the majority of events with social guidelines, certain guidelines, could come back in the medium term. And I think once, let's pray for a vaccine. I think if a vaccine came out and it could be delivered, or if a very good therapy and medicine could come out and really help the prospects of people who catch COVID, then I see no reason that our industry won't come back quickly at that point. I don't say there wouldn't be a build-up, but the underlying fundamental value of the industry is still very strong. The question is, how long does this last? And I think, obviously people are talking about virtual events. I think the future, of course, we're all going to learn a lot about that. I don't think virtual events replace face-to-face events, not on the whole.
Agree.
But face-to-face events, if you've learned a lot over this period around virtual, you'll probably have a hybrid component, or you'll have some virtual elements, etc. So I think that's bound to happen, and I think the technologies will improve. And of course, there could be some business meetings, some business travel that perhaps does get replaced. But I think generally for what we do, which is business events with a real business objective and purpose, that objective is very hard to realize online. You can extend the events online, you can do all sorts of great things, but you can't deliver quite the same experience. So, if you look sort of long term, 3-5 years, I'd very much hope we're back very strongly. And in the meantime, we have to pivot and do our very best.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. That reminds me of the time where soccer game were going to be broadcast on TV, and people were afraid that nobody will go to the stadium anymore. And at the contrary, it enlarged the public, and more people wanted to come. So to your point, if I'm watching a session at IMEX online, I'm very happy I can attend. If for whatever reason I could not be at the show, I'm very happy I can see the content and maybe see the people on TV or online. But at the end of the day, the meetings, the conversation, the business objectives cannot be executed online. I totally agree with you.
I think online you can do a lot, but it's very transactional. I've got this appointment now, I'm going to speak to you, what are we going to talk about? And then we go off. You don't do a lot of chit chat online. You don't really, we have a relationship already. You and I, we've known each other for many years. And so you can sort of carry that relationship on by seeing you online and doing that. But at the end of the day, if that was all we ever did, the relationship, I think, would probably, detract over time. It's very hard to develop a new strong relationship from starting point online. I think it's much more transactional and shorter. You don't get those serendipitous moments. You don't just wander through an online virtual world and find people, and strike up a conversation. And that is the value. It's hard to quantify sometimes, but that is a big, strong value of face-to-face events.
Absolutely. And if I look at all the previous IMEX I've attended, especially in America since I moved, in 3 days, the amount of knowledge, the amount of connection, the people, out of sight, out of mind. No, I'm seeing the people, and the conversation I'm having would never happen online. And yes, it's human, and I love meeting people. But the business conversation, the knowledge I'm getting because I'm there, that is invaluable and cannot be replaced for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So for that reason, I am confident and optimistic about our long-term future, but no doubt that this has been a devastating and continues to be a extremely difficult period until we can start to see how we can come out of lockdown and back into some kind of new normal, until we can maybe go back to a more normal period.
Yeah. And in conclusion for our conversation today, can you speak a little bit of what is your advice for business owners today? And let me just frame it the way I look at it, especially in our industry. A lot of us are not necessarily used to invest in ourselves because we are invited, because there's the hosted buyer program, because there is the hotel chain that are doing conference where we invited. And of course, this is all great, but there's also your individual needs in terms of business acumen. So what would be your advice today for business owners that probably have more time that they would have ever had and they would have ever planned? What would be your advice for all of the business owners to prepare for the future in this interesting moment?
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. I mean, certainly, internally at IMEX, we're taking advantage of the opportunity to learn, to upskill our team. And I think as a business owner, you can take advantage of doing that for yourself or also for your team as well. It's a great time really to look down that list of jobs and things you want to do for your business, or strategies that you were working on that you never quite got to, that maybe you can accelerate during this period. And I think for business owners that really take advantage and do that, then I think that they could come out of this possibly, very strongly. And so I think it's important, of course, depending on your business and your cash reserves and what you can manage, everybody's going to be in a different position. And so things like scenario planning is extremely important, and being very realistic about the situation. But I think if you are able to not retrench so much that you stop, I mean, that's really the trick. And even if that means it's just you personally working on things because you can't afford to employ anybody at this point, but just not to sort of stop and pause your life and your business where it was in February 2020, but think about what it was that you wanted it to be in February 2025 or February 2023, and look at those plans that you had, because anybody that runs a business is an entrepreneur and always has plans, right? Nobody's sitting there going, oh, I never knew what I wanted to do. We've always got a long list of things. So I would really encourage people to look at those and say, what is still relevant in this new world? What do I think is going to really help me the most? And how can I, take this time, if you have time, to really accelerate those? And that's what we're trying to do, and take advantage of the extra time that we've been given to learn and to try new things and to experiment and, to delve deeper into some of the strategic plans that we had.
Wonderful. Carina, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your advice with us. It's been a true pleasure, and I can't wait to see you face to face at IMEX, and hopefully you can prepare one of those coffee with your barista experience.
I'd be delighted.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Great conversation with Carina Bauer from IMEX today. We spoke about the role of women in leadership, especially in our industry, and how to have more women in leadership role. We spoke about the future of our industry and what face-to-face meeting will look like and what is their future. And we also spoke about what business owners can do to prepare themselves for the future. I can't wait to see her face-to-face and hopefully have a coffee prepared by her, because I just learned that she was a barista as well. Please join me on the Business of Meetings Facebook group community. You can find it on the Facebook page, and you can find it as well on www.eventbusinessformula.com. IMEX.com/group. Thank you.